And welcome back. So I'm curious, how did you do with the hands-on lab? Hopefully great. In this video, I just want to do a very accelerated walkthrough of installing vCenter Server appliance, doing the initial config, bringing in the host. If you want additional detail on this process, just check out the previous videos up to this point right before the lab, and they take it at a nice, easy pace. This is just to do a nice soup to dessert walkthrough for the full install. So without further ado, here is my walkthrough of the lab. All right, and here we go. The very first thing I'm going to do is verify that DNS is correctly set up, because that is absolutely critical for continued success in the world of vSphere. So I'm going to launch Server Manager with this icon down here. And from the Tools menu in the upper right, we'll go ahead and launch DNS. Here I'm going to take a look at the forward lookup zone for nuggetlab.com. It indeed is missing ESXi4. I'm going to add that as an A record. It's at IP address 192.168.1.104, and I'm going to create a pointer record for reverse lookup as well. So click Add Host and OK, and then verify it's here, and also verify it's in the reverse lookup. Now, for ESXi4, the actual reverse lookup isn't too important, because it really is mostly important for the reverse lookup for the vCenter Server appliance, but I just want to make sure all the DNS for all the devices is in place, which it is. Fantastic. Next, we'll open up Explorer, File Explorer on the Windows Server. Go down to the D drive, go down to UI installer, and then Win32, and double click on the installer, which is right here. And we're off to the races. I'll make that full screen. We'll click on install, and we'll click on next. We'll accept the agreement and click on next, and then specify the host that we're going to install on, which is ESXi-4.nuggetlab.com. That's the A record we just created, or we could point to the IP address. That would work as well. And the root account on that ESXi host is root, and the password is our lab password, which I'll supply right here. All right, we'll click on next. I recognize that SHA-1 thumbprint, so we'll click on yes. I'll call this vCSA for the VM name on ESXi4, and we'll specify what we want the root password to be on that newly to be created vCenter Server appliance. So we're going to use the lab password. We'll put that in a couple times. Once to set it, once to confirm it, and then we'll click on next. We'll select tiny and click on next, and we'll enable thin disk mode, click on next, and then if we scroll up, insufficient disk space, so we need to create a new data store over on ESXi4. So I'm going to minimize the installer, minimize File Explorer, and I've got a shortcut here on the desktop to ESXi4 for the host client. So we'll click on that a couple times, open that up, log in as root directly to ESXi4, supply the password. Without further ado, we'll go straight to storage, right click, and say new data store. Click on next. So whatever we name it here is going to be the data store that shows up that we install it on, and you're welcome to modify that name if you want to in your lab. So we'll click on next, and finish, and yes. And it is done. So we'll go ahead and minimize that. We'll go back to the installer, and click on back to go back one step, then click on next to go forward, and now it sees the newly created data store, which we will select. Enabling thin mode, we'll then click on next, and we're going to specify a static address for the vCenter server, which is going to be 192.168.1.111, and a mask of 3 octets on, just like that, and the default gateway of 192.168.1.1. and a DNS server, which is 192.168.1.100. And in the previous videos, we took this a little bit slower, so if you need to go and reinforce any of that, those videos are still available for you if you'd like. The fully qualified domain name for this vCenter Server appliance is going to be vCSA.nuggetlab.com. We also verified that in DNS just a moment ago, vCSA.nuggetlab.com. That looks good. And we'll scroll down, and we'll use the standard ports, and we'll click on next. All right, here's a summary. We'll click on finish. And it's going to deploy the vCenter server as part of stage 1. And when stage 2 comes up, we'll jump into that. All right, stage 1 is done. It's on to stage number 2. So we'll click on continue, and then click on next. And then for time synchronization, we want to synchronize with an NTP server at 192.168.1.100. And for SSH access, we are going to enable it, and then click on next. All right, we are going to use vSphere.local as our single sign-on domain. And for the administrator password for vSphere, we're going to go ahead and specify our lab password. So we'll put that in a couple of times, and we'll click on next. I'm going to decline the customer experience program for this lab. Click on next. take a look at our details that we put in, confirm they're correct, and click on Finish. And then click on OK to continue. All right, we're off to the races. Stage 2 underway. This does take a moment, so I went and got a snack. So we'll pick up when stage 2 completes. All right, it is done. So we'll click on Close, and then we'll open up a browser, and we'll go over to the vCenter server interface using the vSphere client. And so let's go to https://whackity-whack vcsa.nuggetlab.com/UI for the user interface, and press enter. All right, we have a self-signed cert, no problem. We'll click on Advanced, scroll down, click on Continue, and now we're going to log in as administrator at vSphere.local. That's the single sign-on domain that we set up, and we'll put in a lab password, and we'll click on Login. We'll go ahead and reset to green any error messages that came up during the initial install of the vCenter Server appliance, no worries. And then we'll right-click over here on the vCenter Server appliance in the navigation pane, and we'll create a new data center. I'm going to call mine Las Vegas, and click OK. And in that data center, I'm going to right-click on it and select New Cluster. I'll call this Cluster 1, and click on Next, and Finish. And for this cluster, it automatically has me on the Configure tab right here, and under Quick Start, so I can very easily add my new ESXi hosts in. So to do that, I'll click on Add, and we'll specify the host we're going to bring in. And we'll specify the root username for each of those hosts and the password. And I'm going to do that 3 more times. I'm going to bring in ESXi 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that same manner. So it's going to copy paste that in and just change it from a 2 to a 3 to a 4 respectively. There we go. And 4. Fantastic. And I'm going to say use the same credentials for all of them, and click on Next. It reached out, found all 4 of those. I'll say select them all, click on OK to bring them in. It's warning me about ESXi 4 because it has a running VM on it. No worries. We'll click on Next and then Finish. All right, so now we have 4 ESXi hosts in that cluster, and 3 of them are in maintenance mode. So to take them out of maintenance mode, we can right-click and just hover over maintenance mode and say Exit maintenance mode, and repeat that for ESXi 2 and 3 as well. So maintenance mode, exit maintenance mode, and ESXi 3, maintenance mode, exit. All right. And then let's take a look at the alerts on each one of them. All right, and we'll suppress those, and that way we can get rid of those yellow warning boxes on each of them. And it just occurred to me that in the demos earlier, I had 2 clusters. I had 1 cluster just for management. Let's actually rename this one to management. So I'll just right-click on the cluster and go down to rename. And let's call it VMGMT. And let's go back into the data center and let's create a new cluster just for the 3 ESXi hosts. So we'll select New Cluster from the dropdown. We'll call it Prod, and then click on Next, and click on Finish. And to move those into Prod, I have to put them back into maintenance mode. I should have done that first. Well, let's do it. Let's fix it anyway. So we'll click on the cluster. I'm going to click on Hosts, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on ESXi 1, hold down my Shift key, go to ESXi 3. That'll select all 3 of them. Then I'll right-click, and for maintenance mode, I'll enter maintenance mode for all 3 of them at one fell swoop. I'll say yes to that. That's going to put them into maintenance mode, which is great. Then I can go ahead and move them over into prod because they're now in maintenance mode. All right, and now that they're in prod, so now that they're back in prod, I'll go ahead and select all 3 of them again. Right-click, go to maintenance mode, and say exit. A little faster than doing them one at a time. And as we continue going through these videos and enjoying them together, as well as the labs, we'll have a lot more opportunity to practice with clusters and moving devices around and working with it. So all that more is coming up. So thanks for joining me for this walkthrough of the hands-on lab, and I'll see you, my friend, in the very next set of videos. Until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.